The Israelites reached the foot of Mount Sinai, and they stayed the night there. Moses went up the mountain to talk with God. The whole mountain started shaking, and fire and smoke appeared. Angels surrounded God as he descended onto the mountain. This amazing scene was shown to the Israelites so that they would accept God's authority and that he is the only real God. God then told him his 10 commandments, which had existed before then. The angels were governed by the commandments, and God had told Adam and Eve, who told their descendants about them. And God said Abraham kept them. He obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. Genesis 26:5. Sinai was the place where God wrote them down. If we look at the 10 commandments, we can see them divided into 2 parts. The first 3 represent loving God, and the last 6 represent loving everyone else. The 4th commandment is the Sabbath, and this is the connection between God and humans. The Sabbath, more than the other commandments, was made to benefit humans, and for God to be honoured. This is why Jesus says, "The Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath." Jesus isn't saying that we own the Sabbath, so we can do whatever we want with it. He's saying that we need to understand that the Sabbath was made for us because it's beneficial for us to keep it. So we shouldn't look at it as a burden or a pain to have to keep it, as if it's somehow bad for us or damaging for us to follow it. We need to see it this way, but we also need to remember that it's a commandment, so it must be kept. The Sabbath is a test of our faith, but it's also a sign that we worship the only real God who made the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th. No other God. And it's a sign that will last forever. The first and second commandments are against idolatry, and after giving the 10 commandments, God specifically warned them against idolatry. He told them not to make any gods out of silver or gold. Even making golden images to represent the true God is against the second commandment. We can't have our churches with images of God or angels or wear golden crosses, because we have a tendency to see the value in the beauty or the expense of these things, and this distracts us from the true reasons we follow God. God told Moses that they will meet enemies that worship other gods, but God will protect them and keep them healthy if they overthrow them, destroy their images, and refuse to worship their gods. This is difficult because other gods are often made out of expensive materials like gold, so they look beautiful and worthy of worship. God showed his people that the idolatry in these countries had led them to the sins that he was using the Israelites to punish. God wanted the Israelites to remove the people that were already in Israel, because otherwise the Israelites would be tempted to worship the other people's false gods. God told Abraham that all of God's followers must be circumcised, which is a cut to the skin. This is to show that God has cut them out and separated them from non-Christians to be different and special. This sign was a promise that they wouldn't marry people that didn't follow God, because if they did, they would stop thinking about and respecting God and his law, and so become like non-Christians. This sign was created because they had failed to separate so many times in the past. In the last days, Satan will do everything possible to mix Christians with non-Christians, to get them watching the same entertainment, doing the same things, and being close friends, so that there will be little difference between the two. Abraham's descendants became friends and married people that didn't follow God. If Abraham's descendants had kept separate from other nations, they wouldn't have been seduced into idolatry and copy their sinful entertainments. They lost a lot of their special character, and God punishes his people to help them. So to punish the Israelites, he caused the famine, which was what forced them to originally move to Egypt. Then God allowed the Egyptians to cause them lots of suffering, so that they would turn to God and ask him for help and obey his laws and separate from people that didn't follow him. There were a small number of families that first went into Egypt, but they grew quickly. Some were careful to teach their children God's laws, but many of the Israelites had witnessed so much idolatry that they had confused ideas about how to understand them. God came down to earth on the Sinai mountain personally and told the Israelites the commandments, so that all of the Israelites could hear him. God didn't trust angels or humans to announce the laws, and didn't even trust their memories, so he wrote them down on stone himself with his finger. He made sure that there was no possibility humans would alter the laws because of tradition or from false teachers. He then got Moses to write down the precise directions on how to keep the 10 Commandments in a simplified way so that there would be no confusion. Today, it is incredibly important that we follow the commandments as stated by God, and not how humans have decided to interpret them. Jesus gave us a better understanding of the law, but didn't change it. Jesus tells us that anyone who teaches others to see a commandment different to how God has written it is wrong. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Therefore, anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands and teaches others accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. The Bible tells us that Satan will try to change God's commandments. He will speak against the Most High and will oppress his holy people and try to change the set times and laws. Satan succeeded, and Jesus told the Israelites they had changed the law. Their teachings are merely human rules. You have let go of the commands of God and are holding on to human traditions. And Satan will attack those who keep God's commandments. And the dragon was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. This means that God's holy people must endure persecution patiently, obeying his commands and maintaining their faith in Jesus. In the last chapter of the Bible, God tells us that, "Blessed are they who do his commandments, that they may have the right to the tree of life, and may enter through the gates into the city." This doesn't mean that we get to heaven by keeping his commandments. We have to accept his commandments and try to follow them, and when we break them, ask for forgiveness and try again. For us to be saved, we need forgiveness for breaking the commandments, and we can only ask for forgiveness if we are sorry for breaking them, and we can only be sorry for breaking them if we want to keep them, and if we want to keep them, then we will try to keep them. If we don't try to keep his commandments, then we clearly don't want to keep them, and therefore are not sorry for breaking them. For this reason, we would not be saved. The reason for keeping the commandments is because we know it is the right thing to do, and we love God, and we love to do what is right. We are not saved by keeping the commandments, but you can only be saved with the right attitude towards them, for your desire to want to keep them, and for your sorrow for failing. This attitude means that we will not be happy following commandments that have been changed. Only the commandments that God originally stated will do. People break the 10 Commandments and so can't have eternal life. However, accepting Jesus' death on the cross forgives us. For the people that existed before Jesus died on the cross, God created extra rules, called the handwriting of requirements. People could follow these to show that they accepted Jesus' future death on the cross, and so be forgiven and have eternal life. It wasn't the keeping of these rules that saved them, but the fact that it showed they accepted Jesus' death. The existence of the handwriting of requirements were described as being against them, because they only existed because they failed to keep the commandments. Therefore, its existence reminded them of their failure. However, once Jesus died on the cross, we don't have to keep these rules anymore, because we can accept his sacrifice directly. Having wiped out the handwriting of requirements that were against us, which were contrary to us, and he has taken it out of the way, having nailed it to the cross. However, Jesus ended these rules by his death, because they represented his death. But he didn't end or change any of the 10 Commandments, and we still need to keep them the same way they were kept in the Old Testament. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. The snake had made Eve believe that sin wouldn't cause death. The handwriting of requirements included animal sacrifices to remind them that the penalty of sin is death. The breaking of God's law made it necessary for Jesus to die to make it possible for man to escape the penalty and yet still fulfill the requirement of God's law that needed death. The sacrifices showed humans that they were breaking God's law, and so it was to teach us humility and lead us to ask for forgiveness by Jesus' death. God created the system of animal sacrifices with Adam after he ate the apple, which he taught to his descendants. The system was corrupted before the flood, and by those who separated themselves from the true followers of God and built the Tower of Babel. They sacrificed to man-made gods instead of the God of heaven. They didn't sacrifice because they had faith in Jesus' future sacrifice, but because they thought it pleased their gods by offering lots of animals. Their superstition led them to bigger and bigger sacrifices, thinking that this would please their gods even more. Because of this, they started sacrificing humans. The people in these countries didn't feel the forgiving grace of God, and so made cruel laws that ignored terrible crimes, but harshly punished small ones. Moses knew this, and said to the people that they should be very careful to follow the laws, especially as other nations would see how they have such wise laws and are so blessed to have God helping them so much. Other people would then join the Israelites and follow God. Moses read the contract to the people, that if they would obey, they would get God's protection, help, and eternal life. The Israelites agreed, and they promised to obey everything God said. Moses then sacrificed an animal and sprinkled the blood on the people to show that they now accepted the death of Jesus and were willing to obey God as their leader.